And I believe we're still waiting on the applicant.
I did reach out to see if they're having issues waiting to get in contact with them. I have heard from them, getting them the right link. There's just some tech issues on their end.
Thanks, Casey. Mr. Chair, we got him the correct link, so hopefully he should join us shortly. Hi, John. Looks like you've joined us. Are you going to need to be able to share your screen?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I'm trying to, I think so.
Okay, let me promote you to panelist real quick.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, if we're good to go, I can start my presentation as well for the recap of the project.
Okay, I would say go ahead.
Okay, so hopefully my presentation is showing. For a quick recap, we are looking at item number DRH 20-00539 located at Bound Crossing. This was for the construction of the multi-tenant building at Bound Crossing Activity Center at the corner of Park Center and Bound. This project was approved January 13th. A condition was added for a future work session, specifically to present design solutions, including for the blank walls, the elevation facing Park Center, as well as to modify the rendering material colors. For the blank wall treatments on the southern elevation, you can see they added a storefront window and canopy. Staff is satisfied with this change, thinks it meets the intent of our conditions. For the western elevation, the applicant did make some changes. As you can see, they added some additional stone veneer, added some modulation. However, there are still some concerns with the blank wall that is circled on that rendering. We would like to see an additional design treatment, which would be the extension of the false column designs, creating a false window, or alternatives as proposed by the applicant or suggested by the committee. Then there was no elevation provided for Park Center. With the renderings, you can see that there were no changes made. As part of the conditions, the stucco cannot exceed 50% of the facade. When I reviewed the project, it did exceed 50%. So the applicant will either need to verify that the stucco is actually less than 50% or extend an additional material. And then with rendering material colors, they did update those. And as you can see, it does reflect the actual selected colors a lot better. So in general, staff is recommending that an additional design treatment be added to the western elevation, that the north elevation be verified that the stucco doesn't exceed that 50%, or the masonry veneer may be extended or another material may be added, but the south elevation condition has been met and the colors are appropriate and meet the intent of the change. And I believe the applicant had some additional elevations to discuss potential design treatments when they're able to present.
Thank you. If the applicant's ready, and I don't see him showing up on here, but when he's ready, go ahead and present.
Okay, can you hear me? All right, thank you. Yeah, I would like to address the western elevation, if I may, and actually the southern elevation as well. Excuse me, the north elevation facing Park Center. And so I'll share, we revised that a little bit to add, I think the elevation, the latest rendering that we had shown on that western elevation was showing more stucco than was going to be allowed. So I sent some updated elevations to Casey, and that's what I'll share with you right now. Oh, let's see here. Okay. So again, focusing on the west elevation and the north elevation. This is the elevation that's in question of containing more than the 50% stucco. I do think we're right at about 50%. So I can send you some calculations and show that to you. If we needed to, we can increase some of the masonry to account to make up for the difference. But I think we're right there. And so then on the west elevation, as you can see from the previous version, we've essentially wrapped the entire back of the building with the masonry. And then it's got a couple precast caps in it, one down lower and then one up to termination of the masonry where it meets the stucco. One of the things I'd show, I think we're still running into some of the issues of the blank wall. And one of the things I would propose here is doing some sort of maybe some banding, or not necessarily some banding, but some pattern work in here with some soldier course, possibly, you know, like a recessed rectangle that's going to mimic, say, a window or depression of some sort. But I would propose, you know, some breaking up the masonry with some, you know, different design work with the masonry, soldier course, some sort of pattern, something like that. So. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, John. Is there any questions for the applicant?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Tom.
Mr. Day, with regard to the west elevation that you were just referring to and the possibility of doing some articulation of the brick patterning or the mason patterning on that section, would it be your intent that that patterning would carry over to the north and south panels that are similarly done, or would it just be isolated to that one panel?
I don't know. I think probably here as well, Tom, but and this one for sure. I just don't think there's enough, you know, if you're talking about these ends, I don't think so. But I would consider this entire section in here available for some sort of pattern work in the masonry.
Okay, very good. And then one more question, John, is I've noticed that you've redesigned the parking lot area to accommodate the revised handicap parking locations as well as the trash receptacle area. Have you reviewed that, the new configuration of that trash area with the city of Boise to see if it complies with their requirements?
Yes, we have.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
thank you. I just wanted to address the issue of all of the stucco. I find it interesting that the side that I imagine will be viewed most, which is the side that faces Park Center, is primarily stucco, in the back that I don't know how many people, well, I suppose people are going to see it upon approach, but they'll sort of excuse it as the back of a building that's the part that has more masonry. I think the stucco makes the building, frankly, look like a sort of a cheap part of a strip mall. And I know that's what we're trying to avoid. And so it would just be nice to see more of the masonry on the front and side of the building. And, you know, I'm not as concerned about the back because that's where people are parking. I also don't see how any banding or pattern work in the masonry in the back is going to solve much. I don't have a problem with the blank wall because of the large sets of windows on either side, but it just seems like decoration just to have decoration. And I think that's a problem with a lot of architecture today, is that you just throw some molding or banding or something on there to make it look like you did something, and it looks like it was an add-on. So I'd rather see either nothing different or something entirely different.
Thank you, committee member Zuckerman. Are there any other comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
So I guess I'm kind of thinking along the same lines as committee member Zuckerman. I almost feel like it makes it look like more of a blank wall with the change and the single color there. I felt like some of the recommendations in the staff report Maybe adding a couple or a single false column in the middle of that kind of tan wall there now that's all masonry, just created more of a pattern than would be, and it, create that rhythm of, some columns, whether or not they're false columns or not, through that space. I think that would probably accomplish a little bit more. And I apologize, I wasn't at the January hearing, but to me, I don't know if maybe the response was the addition of that masonry in the back was to try to reduce the facade below 50% stucco in there. I think maybe a combination of that extension of the masonry and the bringing back kind of those false columns that were in that elevation on that side before, I think accomplishes what we're kind of looking for on the design. I definitely agree with the side that faces Park Center, whether that's an extension of that masonry or something else, just to dress that side up. I realize that there's a fairly large landscape buffer in there, but yeah, I would think that side is very visible. Maybe a little bit more the extension of that masonry and that other ledge that you have above on the west wall would work better on that south wall too. That's kind of my comments.
Any other comments or questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Sorry, the more I look at it, the more concerned I am that it really looks sort of like a generic strip mall. And I think I finally figured out why I think that. It's because of the various heights on the single building. Is it, and because of the moldings, around the tops of the building? Is it, has it come up, has the idea ever been to have it one height so it reads as a single building and not as what looks to me more like a strip mall?
Mr. Chairman, if I may address some of the comments from the
Sure.
committee.
Sure.
Okay. So for the western elevation, the intent of removing the blank walls is to activate the area and also to avoid vandalism or encouraging vandalism by having those blank areas. These elevations weren't provided to staff prior to the meeting. As far as extending the masonry, it does create a blank wall just with masonry. So the intent wasn't necessarily to reduce the stucco per the condition of approval. It is an interior facing elevation, so we don't have that 50% restriction. So it could be stucco. We don't need the extension of the masonry there. As far as the height, as was discussed in the hearing, the varying heights do kind of break up the facade in the front facing Bound. As you can see, it does highlight the different tenant spaces. At this work session, we are specifically talking about the western elevation and the blank walls, the Park Center elevation, and then the rendering colors, which I think no one has issues with. So I think the main concern here is going to be that western elevation, the changes made here, as well as potentially extending the masonry on Park Center facade.
Any other comments?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Casey, I guess, and John, if you put some type of trellis treatment back there, similar to what you have at the northeast elevation, smaller version of that, would that resolve the issue? And is that something the owner would consider? And I'm not an architect, so maybe from a design standpoint, maybe it's not a good solution, but I'm just looking at the entire building and seeing if there's another element from a different elevation that could go back there.
Mr. Chairman, for design review staff, a trellis or some other design material would be appropriate for our condition of just avoiding the blank wall. I think it would be up to John and the owners on what they think is feasible.
Yeah, if I may speak now, I think, you know, that idea had come to mind. The thing I need to be careful about is supporting it and the overhang and how that all works. Unfortunately, the back of the building, I think we've got a 7-foot sidewalk back there, so it's fairly shallow. What I would propose, and I think the owner would buy into it, is if we did mimic some of that trellis work right in this area, and then we applied some of those false columns, if you will, like you see here in the front, to break up this panel a little bit more. I think that those two options would be agreeable and something we could work with, if that makes any sense.
Yes, it does. Any other questions? Guess I'll leave it out there for more discussion, or if somebody wants to make a motion to accept where we're at and make sure that we give the applicant the right amount of direction.
Mr. Chairman, could Casey put the staff's recommendations up again for view?
Is that what you're looking for, Tom?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Sample.
I move to approve the work session drawings dated received January 26, 2021, and per the discussion and revised drawings provided by the applicant and site-specific conditions of approval contained within the work session memo for the hearing dated February 10th, 2021, with added condition of providing confirmation that the northern and southern facades contain less than 50% of stucco, and that an additional design treatment should be provided along the western elevations as discussed.
Second that.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing no discussion, I'll ask Victoria to call a roll on that.
Bella,
Aye.
Rudine,
Aye.
Temple,
Aye.
Aguilar,
Aye.
Zuckerman.
No.
Motion carries 4 in favor, 1 opposed.
Thank you all. We have a little bit of housekeeping before the regular meeting now. We do need to have elections for chairman and vice chairman. I did speak with committee member Marsh since he's not able to attend tonight, and he is perfectly willing to continue as chairman, but would love to give somebody else the opportunity if they wanted it. So I'll open the floor for nominations.
Well, I personally think Mr. Marsh has been doing a fine job, if that makes any difference. And we're kind of comfortable with him leading our show, so I don't have any problem at all if he's the person doing it.
I agree.
I
I
agree with that.
agree as well. I was just going to ask if anybody else wanted to do it and that I'd be happy to nominate them if they're interested, but I think Commissioner Marsh is doing an excellent job as well.
I agree. I think Mr. Rudin's doing a great job as co-chairman as well.
I would move that the nominations be closed and that Chairman Marsh and Vice Chairman Rudin be elected for the next term.
Second,
All those in favor say aye.
I
Opposed? Does that do it for you?
Yes, excellent. Thank you very much.
All right.
I think with that, we can close the work session and we'll see you back here at 6 o'clock.
is it the same link?
It is, yeah. So just stay in the meeting, turn off your microphone and
Okay.
camera and yep.
Josh, we're not going to hear from Cody then, or we will?
We heard from him at the start.
Okay.
Josh, are you still there?
Yeah. In the council chambers, we couldn't hear Cody at all, but I guess he spoke to the group as a whole. So, but I think if we went back and watched YouTube, we would be able to hear
Okay,
his
no problem.
comments. Yeah.
I think he was just thanking us for our service through the pandemic and that, they were really happy with us, sticking it out. And so that was essentially, he was just saying thank you to us, if you were curious.
Okay, thank you.
Josh, I have a question for you.
Okay.
When we start the meeting, I got two sets of kind of notes, and one of them has the sort of diatribe about having a consent agenda and what goes on a consent agenda and appeal periods and all that. And the other one just left that out and started right into the meeting. Do you want me to reread that at the beginning of the meeting?
Yeah, the one that starts out, we are citizen volunteers. That one that talks about the consent agenda would be the correct one to read.
Okay, got it. That's all I needed.
Reading my part and then kick it over to you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Mr. Chairman, if everyone's back, I think we can go ahead and get started.
Very well.
Good evening and welcome to the Boise City Design Review Committee meeting. A few things to start out with for tonight's proceedings. Everyone from the public entering the hearing has been automatically muted and cannot speak. As the item you're interested in comes up for discussion, you will be called upon and unmuted. You will be promoted to panelist and will rejoin the meeting after a slight delay. There is a chat function in Zoom. It is not part of the record and should only be used if technical difficulties arise. If the chat function isn't available to you, you can email zoninginfo@cityofboise.org with any technical issues. Our procedures for public hearings begin with a presentation from the planning team. Then we'll go to the applicant and then the representative of the Registered Neighborhood Association, followed by questions from the commission. After that, we proceed to public testimony, starting with those who signed up in the online sign-up sheet in advance, and then anyone else who raises their hand virtually. If you are attending through your telephone, you can type in *9 to raise your hand. Each member of the public is allowed up to 3 minutes for testimony. We are strict with this time as it is limited in code. Finally, the applicant is allowed 5 minutes for rebuttal, after which the hearing will be closed and the commission will deliberate and render a decision. Tonight's agenda and proceedings will be almost the same as in-person hearings, except that we might have a bit of a delay as we work with all this new technology. Please be courteous and patient with us while we venture through this virtual format. And with that, Mr. Chair, you have the floor.
Thank you, Josh. And welcome, everybody. We are citizen volunteers appointed by the mayor and approved by the city council. We make final decisions on design review permits. Any decisions made tonight may be appealed to the Boise City Planning and Zoning Commission, provided the appeal is within 10 days of this hearing. In order to file an appeal, you must have given written or oral testimony at tonight's meeting. So that's why it's important that you give your name and address when you testify tonight, if you do. We utilize a consent agenda. This means that if the applicant agrees with the staff report and if there is no public opposition, the item will be placed on the consent agenda. All items that are placed on the consent agenda are approved with one motion without further public comment. For items not on the consent agenda, we will hold a full public hearing in the order on the agenda with staff, applicant, neighborhood association, and then public testimony. Thank you all for virtually attending tonight. I would like to call the February 10th, 2021 Design Review Committee meeting to order. Victoria, could you call the roll?
Zabala,
Here?
Rudine,
Here.
Temple,
Here.
Aguilar,
Here.
Zuckerman,
Here.
5 present, 2 absent.
Thank you. At this time, I would take a motion on the January 13th, 2021 minutes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I would move for approval of the design review hearing minutes of January 13th, 2021 as prepared by staff.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Victoria, would you please call a roll?
Zabala,
Aye.
Rudine,
Aye.
Temple,
Abstain, as I was not at last month's hearing.
Aguilar,
Aye.
Zuckerman.
Aye.
Motion carries 4 in favor.
Thank you, Victoria. There is one item up for deferral, DRH 21-00008. That is a location of 2850 West Fletcher Street. It's number 6 on our agenda. Is there any member of the audience wishing to speak to this item who cannot make it to a future date? And I guess I should ask staff when we are deferring that to, or do you have a time?
Mr. Chairman, to March 10th, next month, please.
March 10th. So I'll say that again. Is there anybody in the audience wishing to speak to this item that cannot make it to that March 10th date? I don't see any hands being raised, so I'll take a motion to accept that deferral.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
move for deferral of DRH 21-0008 to the March 10th, 2021 hearing.
Second,
I have a motion and a second. Victoria, would you call a roll?
Zabala,
Aye.
Udine,
Aye.
Semple,
Aye.
Aguilar,
aye.
Zuckerman,
Aye.
all in favor, motion carries.
The first item we are considering for tonight's consent agenda is DRH 20-00570, located at 2420 South Orchard Street. It's the construction of a new approximately 3885 square foot single-story commercial building with associated site improvements on property located in a C2D zone. Is the applicant present?
We are.
Are you in agreement with the recommendations of approval?
We've reviewed the staff report and find the findings to be acceptable, so we are in agreement with the staff report and the conditions of approval.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public wishing to testify in opposition to this item? Seeing none, this item will be moved to the consent agenda. The second item to be considered for tonight's consent agenda is DRH 20-00575, located at 1802 North 33rd Street. It's the construction of a new approximately 10,169 square foot, 3-story laboratory building with associated site improvements on property located in a C2D zone. Is the applicant present?
Yes. This is Steve Pavlik with Insight Architects.
Thank you. Are you in agreement with the recommended conditions of approval in the staff report?
Yes, we are in agreement.
Are there any members of the public wishing to testify in opposition to this agenda item? Seeing none, this item will be moved to the consent agenda. The third item to be considered for tonight's consent agenda is DRH 21-00005, located at 702 East Boise Avenue. Construction of a new approximately 2,325 square foot single-story restaurant with drive-through window and associated site improvements on property located in a C1D zone. Is the applicant present?
Yes, we are.
And are you in agreement with the recommended conditions of approval in the staff report?
Yes, we are.
Is there any member of the public wishing to testify in opposition to this agenda item? Seeing none, this item will be moved to the consent agenda. The final item to be considered for the consent agenda is item number 7, DRH 21-00009, located at 11900 West Franklin Road. Construction of a new approximately 6125 square foot single-story storage building with associated site improvements on property located in an M1D zone. Is the applicant present?
Yes, this is David Blodgett with Radine Architects.
And are you in agreement with the recommended conditions of approval?
Yes, we are in agreement.
Is there any member of the public wishing to testify in opposition to this agenda item? Seeing none, this item will be moved to the consent agenda. I will take a motion on the consent agenda at this time.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Zabala.
I would move that the consent agenda and all items on the consent agenda be approved, subject to all the findings and conclusions and conditions of approval agreed upon for each application. And that would include the late correspondence on 3 designated items in the memo provided to the committee on February 8th, and the correspondence provided on DRH 21-0005 with regard to revised site plan elements, and whether or not those items have been met in the revised site plan.
Do I have a second on that motion?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Victoria, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, yes, go ahead, Dan.
my firm is the landscape architect on item number 2. So on the consent agenda, my vote will not include a vote on that item.
Thank you. And Victoria, before I ask you to call a roll, I'll go ahead and note that I'll be abstaining on my vote from item number 7, since my firm is the applicant. So Victoria, would you call a roll?
Zabala,
Aye.
Udine,
Aye.
Temple,
Aye.
Aguilar,
Aye.
Zuckerman,
Aye.
all in favor, motion carries.
The first item to be heard tonight is DRH 20000547, located at 113 South 5th Street. Construction of a new 3-story mixed-use building with associated site improvements on property located in a C5DD zone. This was a deferral from the January 13th hearing. I'll turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This project was deferred at the January hearing, and the committee asked for some additional information. And the applicant has provided that additional information, including the metal panel system manufacturer and product. They are proposing the Morin exposed fastener series, and they also have provided the profile and some connection details. Including the curb detail. So they are showing that the curb will extend past the metal panel system, which was something the committee asked to see. They are proposing the mechanical units at grade at the rear of the building, and those will be screened by a perforated metal panel system. And I did confirm that they are proposing those at the full height of the mechanical units. And then the committee also asked for some additional details regarding the green roof. So they've provided sections of a 4-inch green roof assembly and 12-inch green roof assembly. So the larger roof area has that 12-inch green roof assembly, and then the smaller roof areas have the 4-inch. And we have the taller blue fescue at the front of the building. So I think those were the main items that the committee wanted to see. And I think Sean with the applicant team is available to kind of review those details with you.
Thank you. At this point, I turn it over to the applicant, and if you would please state your name and address for the record.
Yes, hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Sean Kennedy, architect with GGLO, 1199 Shoreline Drive, Suite 290, Boise, 83702. Thank you for having us here. I think Caitlin kind of covered the overall context or content of the additional information that we provided. And I'd like to share my screen if I could.
Mr. Kennedy, just a moment and you will rejoin as a panelist.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I won't go into those details that Caitlin has already covered unless there's something specific that you'd like to ask for. I did want to show something, though, just based on some of the questions that we had going back and forth with Caitlin, to explain the mechanical, the revision to the mechanical screening that we've provided now. Originally, we were anticipating that the mechanical units would be located on the roof. After some additional engineering over the last several weeks, last month, we realized that in order to meet our sustainability requirements and the types of mechanical units that we were going to, that we'd like to use, they really were not going to be able to use them on the roof and screen them effectively. So we've actually created a room, an area for the mechanical equipment at the ground floor at the rear. That space right there is enclosed by a perforated metal panel that has the same color finish, the same paint finish, and the same profile as the metal panels above. It's just a perforated screen to allow air flow through the system. And you can see, with respect to Caitlin's comment about the full height, you can see that it runs in the same profile, and it just corresponds exactly to the system above. And this would be the view from right around the corner. And then again from the back. So that fully screens the mechanical equipment, and the distribution is on the inside. One other thing that I wanted to note is on the roof, we will have, this is the elevator overrun area right here that needs to raise up just a little bit above that roof. And there's a fan unit in there. We've screened that fan unit with a wood lattice that matches the same materials that we're using on the elevation on the facade inserts at the windows in order to screen that fan unit in there. And that's all I wanted to show in addition to the package that was already distributed to you. I'm happy to answer any other questions, though.
Thank you. Are there any questions for the applicant or staff?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Mr. Ball.
Mr. Kennedy, thank you for your package and the detail you provided. I think that's solved a lot of the questions that I had on how you were going to accomplish some things. One of the questions I had was with regard to your the foundation wall extensions above grade that vary in height. I assume that the higher wall depicted would be along the alley side, and the lower areas would be in the other elevations.
I assume that you're asking about this wall right
Yes.
along here, if you can see
That's
where
correct.
my hand is. Yeah, the site actually does have a slight slope, so the height of that wall varies a little bit along this edge by about 6 to 8 inches, I believe. And that sort of curb wall kind of goes all the way around. We chose this height. We initially had set it a little bit lower. We chose this height after some discussions about maintenance and security along this edge here and any damage that might happen to the wall system there. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and I think it makes sense along that alley because given that location and the activity that's in that area, I'm going to assume that there may be some people driving down that alley that have double vision at late at night.
Yes.
The other question,
and to just clarify, as you go around to the other side of the building, the other side of the building is slightly higher, so that wall is a little bit shorter on the pedestrian side.
okay. Can you tell me with regard, you've gone into so much detail on all the other components of the exterior. What finish do you anticipate on that wall? Is it just going to be board formed or out of the form concrete, or are you planning any kind of a surface treatment on that?
We do plan to do it as an architectural finish with a paint. and the paint, with a paint that will match the color of the siding above. We haven't selected an actual color, but I expect it would be something with the same hue and tone, but maybe a slightly lighter, just slightly lighter to fit into the color scheme of the rest of the elevation.
Okay, very good, thank you. Then this is just a comment. It's not really a question. On the wood panels that are going to be an accent there. I noticed in the information that you provided that over time, depending on the orientation and weather conditions, that those panels will eventually go to a gray, like a weathered redwood almost in certain locations. And I guess my comment is from the renderings and the elevation, I like what I see in their more original color being something that would be there for a longer period of time, as opposed to turning gray and then sort of blending or mushing in with the balance of the color of the building. With that said, I realize that the elevations that you've got here are on the north side of the building, so a lot of exposure that we would have and the weathering you may have as far as sun and that deterioration would not occur as quickly, or maybe not as much. But anyway, as a personal opinion, I like the contrast that has been shown in the renderings, and I almost wish it wouldn't go away over time.
I will say I agree with your the line of thought that you have there, and we can take that into consideration. I do think that while our consideration here was we could have used a non-wood material, we could have used some kind of composite material or something like that that would never really change. We wanted to use an actual real wood material, and so it becomes just a question of how it's maintained over the long term. But I think our view on it was, as you referenced, since this facade is on the north side, sort of the northeast side even, it really doesn't get a lot of direct sunlight or any, and we weren't expecting that it would truly sort of fade. But we can definitely take note of your comment and think about that.
Okay, thank you. I think you've done a good job, and as I said at the previous meeting, I really like the work that you've done on this building and the detail that you've gone to. One last one before I get off my soapbox. I hope that your design team has also considered the eventual signage that's going to go on the building and where and how you're going to handle it. I've been disappointed in a lot of the newer buildings that we see in the downtown area seem to have scattershot signage going from floor to floor to floor as the tenants want to get their name publicized out to the public. And this building is really nice, and I'd hate to see the one last element on it kind of take away from all the work that you've done.
Thank you for saying all of that. Yes, that is something that we have thought some about, especially as the project has progressed. The tenants are not completely confirmed yet, but we do have some thoughts about how signage would be very much integrated into the canopy and into the wall panel next to the door, and have it be a very integrated element, as opposed to just sort of a random backlit box or something. We fully intend it to be something that is relatively modest in scale and very much in the language of the architecture.
Very good. Thank you very much. I appreciate your comments.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Is there any member of the public that would like to testify on this application? Seeing none, I will ask if there are any other final questions for the applicant or staff. Seeing none of that, I will close the open meeting of the session and turn it over to discussion and a motion. I can say from my perspective, it looks like they've addressed everything pretty handily, and it continues to look like a pretty smart piece of architecture. And I don't have any problem with any of the solutions that they've suggested at this point. If everybody sort of agrees with that, we could take a motion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I seem to be hogging the airtime tonight. I'll move ahead here. I would move to approve DRH 20-00547 as recommended in the findings of fact and the conclusions of law and the recommended conditions of approval as noted in the project report.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that motion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
I agree with what you said previously. I think this is a beautiful building, and all of our concerns expressed at the previous meeting have been addressed.
Any other comments? Victoria, would you call a roll?
Cavalli,
Aye.
Udine,
Aye.
Temple,
Aye.
Aguilar,
Aye.
Zuckerman,
Aye.
all in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. The next item up to be heard is DRH 21-00002, located at 901 North 27th Street. It's the construction of a new mixed-use development with 65 residential units and approximately 7,000 square feet of commercial space in a 4 3-story buildings with associated site improvements on property located in a C1D DA zone. With that, I'll turn it over to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this project is located at the northwest corner of 27th Street and Stewart Avenue. So the old approvals from the current planning was a PUD in 2018, and then recently they've modified that PUD approval to change the unit mix. And there was a rezone to the C1D zone with a development agreement. So we have buildings along Stewart and 27th Street with the parking in the rear. We have one driveway off Jordan Street, and then the rest of the access is off the alley. And we do have a number of trees that need to be removed to allow for the building to be placed where it is. And it sounds like the applicant is going to do what they can to see if they can save some of those trees. But with the building layout approved by current planning, there's not really too much shifting of the building itself we can do at this point. But they are going to work with forestry too to look at the street tree mitigation calculations and see what they can do to save any of the trees on site that they can. And then the development agreement, I think the two items that probably pertain the most to us is the landscaping. So it says open areas within the site will be landscaped with plants and trees consistent with the City of Boise 30th Street Master Plan, including street planters. The developer shall consider participating with CCDC to install silva cells along 27th Street and Stewart Avenue adjacent to the site. Dense deciduous plants shall be planted to screen the parking areas. An effort shall be made by the developer to retain as many mature existing trees as possible. All other landscaping shall be in compliance with the C1 neighborhood commercial zone. So as you can see in that landscape plan, they do have trees in pretty much every open area that they have left on the site. They have trees along the alley as well. And then they have the trees within the silva cells. And then in regard to the building form and scale, the development agreement says all new buildings constructed as part of this project will be residential in character. The roof form will be both gabled and flat and will not exceed a height limit of 35 feet. Exterior fenestration at the ground level will be modern retail, including historic elements or residential in scale. Above the ground floor, fenestration will be residential in scale. The building facade will have horizontal and vertical recesses and offsets. So I think if we look at the renderings, they've done that. They do have ground floor parking along the north building, along the street here. And then their commercial area, let me grab the site there, the floor plans. So they have their commercial space on the ground floor, and then the ground floor parking, and then some ground floor residential units. And then above are all residential units on the second and third floors. So I think we have another couple renderings here, but I think it does show that they have the residential scale fenestration on the upper floors. They have both gabled and flat roofs. And they have some kind of historic elements in their storefront while also having a modern look. So I think they've met the development agreement requirements pretty well. And I think they are they're in agreement with all of the recommended conditions of approval, but we might have a couple members of the public wanting to speak on this one. So I think Steve might be there to from the applicant team, and I think he might be in person.
Thank you, Caitlin. I will, is the applicant present somewhere?
I'm here at City Hall.
Thank you. I'll turn it over to you if you'll say your name and address for the record.
This is Steve Trout with Trout Architects. We're at 2504 West Kootenai here in Boise. Mr. Chairman and committee members, thanks for taking your time to review this exciting project that we have going down on 27th and Stewart. Caitlin kind of mentioned the process of getting here, but if I can elaborate just a little bit more. In 2018, we started with a different owner than we have right now, which is Mike Prentice, who is also with me if you have any questions concerning that side. We initially proposed a whole different building than you see now, and the neighborhood did not like it. I'll just be blunt with that. We went back to the neighborhood and met with them several times and came to the design that you see now. Their primary focus was they wanted a Hyde Park feeling to their new building in their neighborhood, which is really hard to do with 3 stories at this scale. So if you see the modulation of the building, there are 5 different buildings in this. So we tried to break it up as would be done as best we could in a Hyde Park vernacular. So that's where the historical overtones are coming in, but yet some of the modernism on the top. Anyway, so this has been well vetted by the neighborhood as we went through it, I feel. Caitlin mentioned the existing trees. We will be trying to save a few trees. We found a few trees that got missed in our initial planning. Some pines on the northern end of the property that I think we can save. And there might be one or two in the alley that we can save. The one problem we have is that the grade of this project is about 2 feet below the street. It's been flood irrigated and it's fairly low. So to bring it up to street level, we have a little problem of saving some existing trees just because we're burying the root structures. There has been some comments made as we got ready for our hearing tonight about the parking lot lighting. I want to say we're very cognizant of this issue and our neighbors across the alley. We will be working to get our lights so we don't blend over into their yards at night. We're also working on this project as a night sky project. So all of that, we're trying to be very friendly to the neighborhood. Same with the trash. We've heard comments about trash could be an issue of picking that up. We've oversized the trash enclosures just slightly so we can put more dumpsters in there so we can have less collection times. So the noise that the collection will make we're trying to mitigate that to our neighbors and to our clients there at the thing. There was a comment I think Caitlin made about the trees on 27th being ash. We're going to actually be changing those to an emerald sunshine elm is what we're proposing today, which is different, Caitlin, than what I told you earlier. The Silva cells, I wanted to let you know that we are in conversation with CCDC to put those Silva cells in. So per our development agreement, they only asked us to try to work with that. And so Mr. Prentice is currently in conversation trying to get those Silva cells put in, as well as the other right-of-way improvements. In our conversations with the neighborhood, one of our neighbors mentioned that it would be nice to have some public art on the corner of Stewart and 27th. We have a large plaza there. And so we've launched off, again, talking to CCDC and Arts and History Department to see if we can get some art put in on that corner. It'd be an excellent piece, vertical piece would be really nice there. And then finally, just to mention, there's also been conversation in the neighborhood about preserving or moving the existing housing. There's a couple nice little houses in there. So Mr. Prentice and the past owner, Rex Nielsen, are working to get those houses moved. We have a couple interesting parties. So anyway, that's an ongoing event. For the ones that we can't move, we're also exploring salvage. So we're checking out different salvage availabilities to get those materials recycled and out of the landfill and not fill the landfill. So it's just a little background. And other than that, Caitlin presented it well, so.
Thank you, Mr. Trout. Is there any questions for the applicant from the committee? I will thank you again for your presentation, and I'll open it up to the public. Is there anybody from the public who wishes to testify about this project at this time?
Marcia, I know you have some visuals to show, so I will add you as a participant.
So Josh, I'm not seeing any public people raising their hand. Am I accurate there?
We have a couple, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, okay. I'll let you take over then.
Marcia will be first.
Yeah. Hi, can you all hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Here I am. I can see me. All right. I'm supposed to give my name and address first, right?
That is correct. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. My name is Marcia Franklin, and I live at 2521 West Stewart Avenue in Boise. That's a block from the development. And I've lived in the neighborhood for almost 28 years. So I am going to try and share screen, which I've never done before. If you can bear with me, hopefully this will work. And we can do that. There it is. Can you all see that?
Mm-hmm.
Is that seeable?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'm going to start my testimony. I'm going to just speak specifically to the design element of the landscaping and go into more detail on the tree issue. This property is really unique for any neighborhood in that it's a small glade and woods. And here's a look from above. As you can see, it really stands out in the neighborhood, and that's because more than 40 trees provide a canopy of shade and habitat. And here's a closer look at that. The canopy includes large oak and walnut trees, as well as some really gorgeous specimens of evergreens. I did take a little video of some of them. I wish the deciduous trees were fully leafed out, but if you walked by in a few months, you'd see just how lush the canopy is. All these trees will be cut down and replaced with very small trees in grates. They will never mature to these heights nor ever provide a canopy or a habitat. The existing tree cover will be demolished not only for the apartments, but also for a parking lot for more than 80 vehicles. Now, I don't want to stop this development, but I am here because I really believe that we can and we must save some of the mature trees on this property. The Blueprint Boise plan clearly prioritizes the environment, including a healthy urban forest. Goal ES 6.2 calls for preserving healthy specimens of mature species and the health and survival of all intermediate age trees. Removing 38 trees, many of them healthy, intermediate, and mature specimens, is not in alignment with Blueprint Boise. In addition, Boise's tree ordinance clearly states that the city will maintain the maximum amount of canopy coverage and preserve and enhance the city environmental, economic, and social character with mature trees. The removal of 38 trees does not seem to be in compliance with Boise's tree ordinance. We have citywide climate change and tree planting initiatives. The removal of 38 trees and the construction of a large parking lot that will add to our heat map is not in keeping with these initiatives, in my view. Now, the current developer, as you know, has told neighbors he would like to save some of the trees, which is great. And we have an enlightened architect and landscape firm involved. I've walked the perimeter many times and believe that there are healthy, mature trees that can be saved in the future parking lot area. We actually have a great example of how to do that just a block away at another complex, also designed by Mr. Trout. The Davis Street apartments not only have mature trees surrounding them, but there's also a large tree in the middle of the parking lot that provides shade, a gathering space, and a respite for the eye. Here's how that looks from above. You know, I would also urge that permeable concrete be used for this parking lot to prevent runoff, and Mayor McLean has made this a priority. So in sum, I'll just stop the share. I would like to see the permit for this development be conditioned on saving some of the mature trees, not just a suggestion, and that the final design review decision be deferred until the city forester and the landscape firm have re-examined opportunities to do that. This is really a chance to benefit the property, the environment, and future generations. And we really have the knowledge and creativity to do this. And I feel we have the obligation to as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Franklin. Are there any questions for seeing none, I'll say thank you again. Are there any other members of the public willing to or wishing to testify?
Mr. Chairman, next will be Chris.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Committee members, can you hear me okay?
Yes, and if I could remind you to state your name and address for the record.
Absolutely. I'm not sure if my video is on, but my name is Chris Testa. I live at 900 North 28th Street here in Boise's West End, 83702. I also serve on the board as a board member on the West End Neighborhood Association. I love living in the city of trees, and every time I am hiking in the foothills, I'm grateful for that mature tree canopy that covers much of our city. One of the main reasons we live here in the West End is for these mature trees that we're discussing in today's hearing. I appreciate them for the shade that they provide in the summer, the fantastic scenery we see in the fall, all the privacy from neighbors, and then to provide a home for our local wildlife as well. As a board member, I'm very familiar with this particular development and approved development plan. It's across the alley from my house. and I support the improvements to our neighborhood, including commercial space that improves our walkability, a new dwelling to improve the aesthetics of our community. I recognize the intent from the developer to do the best that they can related to these trees on site, but I would be remiss if I didn't comment for the public record here. To allow a development to occur in the city of trees that plans to completely destroy a lush, mature canopy and replace it with a parking lot just seems out of character for our city. I would strongly urge the committee to encourage the preservation of these mature trees. I ask that the design for this development make modifications to incorporate them into that parking lot. I guess I second Marcia's comments that this should not just be a suggestion. My window looks out at this property that's planned for development. All year round, I look and enjoy this wooded area that currently occupies this space. I watched squirrels playing, birds nesting. I've seen baby raccoons grow up in these trees. And to tear those down in May timeframe would completely disrupt a significant amount of wildlife. In addition, I am conscious of some of the other concerns that we've expressed to the developer, and I know they've made comment about the lighting in the parking lot that's going to feed over across the alley into our homes, the privacy of a 3-story apartment that will look into our backyards. And I think that this preservation of these mature trees will provide that natural screen and desired privacy from those new neighbors from us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions for Mr. Testa?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Can we hear from, is this an appropriate time to hear from either Caitlin or from the applicant about, their reaction to the request to save some of the trees and, what's been tried and what's possible?
Sure. If there are no other questions for Mr. Testa, we'll turn it back over to the applicant and let him address the points that were made by the public testimony.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Ben.
I would just making sure that there's not any other public testimony before we go back to the applicant.
Yeah, good point. Josh, is there anybody else?
Mr. Chairman, I do not see any more hands.
Okay, with that, I'll turn it over to the applicant.
Thank you. Steve Trout here again. I'll pick off the first one easy for Ms. Franklin's comment on permeable pavers. We are intending to use permeable pavers in this project, which will cut down a little bit on the heat load coming from the typical black asphalt because they come in a little different color. Concerning the trees, I'm not a landscape person, so I depend on other people to inform me of this. But our goal is to save as many trees as we can. We're having a big meeting there coming this Wednesday with the civil engineer, landscape architect, and myself and the owner to review it one more time. In the previous submittals, we had a different landscape firm said that probably we couldn't, not even probably, we couldn't save them because of the depth and location of those trees. There's a drainage swell where most of those really nice trees are located, or some of them, that will have to be filled in so we can get a parking lot out of it, unfortunately. But I totally agree with Mr. Testa and Ms. Franklin on trying to preserve the trees. We just don't have a good way of doing that and getting the density of the project that the property requires. There are some trees that hit our planters pretty good. We've moved planters around trying to get them. We're going to try some more to do that. But again, it's more the elevation than the location that is causing us a problem here. I'll just leave it at that right now.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Trout. Any questions for the applicant?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Sample.
Not so much a question necessarily as just a comment, I guess. I'm really glad to hear that you are working with the landscape architect and the owner, and I would definitely encourage, if at all possible, getting in touch with someone down at the city forestry department. They're always willing to come out and evaluate trees. They're not, I don't believe they charge anything for that service upfront, just to see what their recommendations would be, because they are working around these trees within this urban environment on a daily basis. So they can really provide some insight. So I would encourage that. I'm sure that Caitlin or anyone else could, on the staff could get you in touch with them. But it is good to see that. Definitely like to see trees being saved in the city of trees. I appreciate the comments that from Mr. Testa and Ms. Franklin earlier too. As a landscape architect, to save as many trees as we can is great. Obviously, sometimes some have to come out and they're mitigated for. So we're hopefully replacing them over time, if not increasing the canopy over time with the addition of trees through these projects also. But yeah, that's kind of my comment. So, but thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
Mr.
you.
We're familiar with that process, so we'll be bringing them on too. I just didn't mention it.
Any other questions for Mr. Trout?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Zabal.
this is more of a comment than a question. In looking at drawings that were provided to us on sheet L1, which is the landscape plan, or a portion of the landscape plan showing the new, but it also shows the existing, or the apparent locations of the existing trees. And I think I respect Mr. Trout's comments about not only the elevation of the site, but the location of some of these trees. A fair majority of them appear to be within the footprint of the building. It's the building's proposed location. Rough count here was approximately 23 trees or so, as indicated on this plan here, with about half that number being off the building footprint, but within the site itself that Mr. Trout has indicated they're going to try to work with in terms of perhaps moving some of the parking landscape around. But I think there's probably no way to save a fair amount of these trees that's just currently laid out in this plan. But I do encourage that they do everything they can to work with the city and with their landscape architect and others to do what they can with the trees that are not in harm's way.
Thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you, Mr. Trout. Anybody else from the public out there that wants to testify or have a comment? Josh?
Mr. Chairman, there is one more, Lauren.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I just had a quick question.
Lauren, if I could interrupt you for a second, if you would give us your name and address for the record, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Lauren Panisi, 2411 West Pleasanton Avenue in Boise, 83702. I just had a follow-up question about the meeting about the trees. Is that on February 17th? Is that on the site? And would residents or board members from the West End be allowed to participate?
Thank you, Lauren. I'll ask that over to Steve to answer that question, I guess.
I think that would be excellent if they could join us. It is on the 17th, yes, at 10 o'clock. We'll probably meet in the large parking area on 27th there by the armor all or the guardrail.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you.
Any other people to testify, Josh?
That does appear to be it.
Any other questions for staff or the applicant at this point? Seeing none, I'll close the public portion of the meeting and open it up to the staff for discussion. So any comments?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I recognize that a lot of us choose to live in these older neighborhoods somewhat because of the beautiful old trees, and that replacing them with more trees that are smaller doesn't necessarily do the job. But on the other hand, we aren't planning and zoning, and we don't dictate whether it's appropriate to build a 3-story building on this privately owned lot that is zoned for building. It's not zoned as a nature preserve. So as much as I would love to see the applicant save as many trees as possible, I feel like it is not our job to stop them from building what I think is a good-looking building that fits in very well with the neighborhood and allows a lot of density without being overpowering, and creates a really good pedestrian environment for 27th Street. I don't feel like it's our role to try to stop that in order to save the trees. So I would like to keep it as, we make a request that the applicant goes and meets on February 17th with anybody who's interested in the area, and keeps in mind that, beautiful old trees are impossible to replace, but I don't think that we can put further limitations on it. I don't think that's within our authority.
Thank you for your comments. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Semple?
Yeah, I totally agree with that as well. I mean, I think that it's nice to see that the applicant and the architect are working as much as possible to help save these trees. But yeah, kind of the nature of development, some of these things are going to have to change, and grading to get things flat enough for parking and everything else that's required for these projects requires the removal of some trees. I think that as much as they can try to do that, I don't think that we can hold up a project because of that at this level. But to encourage, just to keep encouraging that is all we should be doing.
Thank you for that. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, I would concur with the previous comments, and also want to note that beyond the meeting that will take place here in a few days, that one of the requirements of the site-specific conditions is that the trees within the parking lot will be a 3-inch caliper at the time of planting, which is a larger tree size than we would normally expect to see in these locations. So I think their applicant and the design team are sensitive to what they're doing and trying to do as good a job as possible.
Thank you. I'm wondering, is there any tolerance on everybody's part to add a condition that we put in there that they hold the meeting on the 17th? And because right now they're say they're going to do it, but we could have it as a condition of approval or not.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Do we know if that meeting was dictated by planning and zoning or any other authority, or is that just at the will of the developer?
I don't know the answer to that. I'll turn that over to staff if they could answer that question for us.
Mr. Chairman and committee members, I believe that was just the applicant meeting out on the site. I don't think there was any requirement for a meeting.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Semple.
Yeah, I think that at this point, they've committed to holding that meeting. They've given that information to the neighborhood, it sounds like. I think it probably wouldn't work out too well for them if they don't hold that meeting. So I don't think we need to put that as a condition of approval. And because of that, I am going to move to approve DRH 21-00002 as recommended in the findings of fact, conclusions of law, and the recommended conditions of approval noted in the project report.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on that motion? Seeing none, Victoria, I'd ask you to call a roll.
Sabala,
Aye.
Rudine,
Aye.
Semple,
Aye.
Aguilar,
Aye.
Zuckerman,
Aye.
all in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. And that's our last item on the agenda. So I can conclude this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Josh.